You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 172. Living in the past is not time well spent. However, pausing to reflect on God's goodness in our lives gives hope and reminds us that He is near. Join me as we take a walk down memory lane and reflect on the top 15 episodes from season 1 of Faith Breathed Hope. Today we're listening to speaker and founder of My Good Grief, Cheryl Parker, on organ donation. You can find Cheryl on social, YouTube, and on adaptdna.com. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Cheryl, and welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. For the audience, Cheryl is actually going to be in the 2020 Grief Symposium, and so we've worked on interviewing for that, so make sure to catch her there. But right now, I would like for you just to tell the audience a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I'm a grief expert. I work with people dealing with grief and loss, and I'm also a mental health facilitator. So I go into workplaces and do training on strategies on how to deal with mental health and take a little more proactive approach to mental health before it gets to the point of needing more serious assistance and resources, as well as training with the Ontario Junior Hockey League. So working with the youth and letting them know that it's okay to not be okay, and for them to talk about it and provide resources and training for that. I've been featured on many news, TV interviews, talk shows, and features in magazines, and especially around organ donation. I was the national spokesperson for organ donation after my 8-year-old daughter Rachel died, and that has just fueled my passion to get out and educate people on how to grieve and how to support others who are grieving.
And that's what we're here to talk about today is the organ donation. But before we start that, I really would like to just ask you to tell the audience your story about Rachel and how it happened to move you towards the organ donation.
Sure. So my family was hit with a flu bug, and my son, Sean, who was 6 at the time, got the flu, and then I got the flu, and then my 8-year-old daughter got the flu, and she just wasn't bouncing back from it. And at one point, her stomach was really hard, and so I took her to the hospital to get her checked out, and they told me that she had a condition called ITP, where your antibodies attack the platelets instead of the virus itself. And what typically happens is the platelets get to a really low level, and then they start multiplying and you recover. However, there's a less than 1% chance that you can have a spontaneous bleed, and that can be in any of your organs, and that again can be recoverable. However, with Rachel, she got a bleed, and her bleed was in her brain. So it didn't present the same way as it would have if it had been in the other organs. So by the time we figured out what was going on, and we called in a neurological doctor to do a CT scan, he discovered the bleed, and then her platelets were so low that it was difficult to operate because she would bleed to death. So they were pumping her full of platelets to get it up to a safe level so that they could perform brain surgery on her to remove the front left lobe of her brain to release the pressure. However, after a few hours of surgery, they realized that her brain was too swollen and they couldn't save her. So she was pronounced brain dead. So, I mean, at the time it was like, back up the bus. My kid's got the flu. You're not supposed to die from the flu. And, but these complications had caused her death. So while we were saying our goodbyes, the doctor had asked me if I had considered organ donation. And I said no, but she had.
Mm.
And they said, "What?" And I explained that just 5 weeks before, I had been reading a newspaper article in the Toronto Sun about a little boy who had undergone a double lung transplant. And he was sitting in a hospital bed with his arms extended in victory. And Rachel peeked over my shoulder and asked me what I was reading. And I said, "Well, this little boy has had a lung transplant." And she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, his lungs were sick." And she said, "Well, how do you get new lungs?" And I explained organ transplant to her. And she went back to playing. And then a few minutes later, she said, "When I die, I want to give my organs so I can save kids." And
Mm.
at the time, I thought, oh my gosh, like, just, you're so proud of your kid because they're embracing the gift of it, and how
Mhm.
beautiful her innocence was around all of that. Little did I know that 5 weeks later, I would
Mhm.
be recalling that conversation and be able to fulfill her wishes. And in that time of absolute desperation and being on my knees, it's like the only thing I could do was fulfill on her wishes.
Mhm.
So at the time, Mike Harris, the Premier of Ontario, and Don Cherry were putting together the Trillium Gift of Life organization. And Rachel became a bit of a poster child for organ donation because she had actually expressed her wishes, and they were advocating for people to express their wishes instead of just, assuming that their families would know. So
Mm.
that's how it all came about.
Oh, wow. Again, well, I would like to tell you that I am sorry for your loss. When you when this happened, when Rachel actually mentioned that 5 weeks prior to what happened, and this might be a hard question, but do you see that as a God breathed moment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The whole situation felt very, divine intervention. I mean, the story is just so incredible. Like, you can't make this stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely. I think, little did I know at the time, but in retrospect, looking back, absolutely, I felt
Mm-hmm.
like it was a God moment.
Definitely. I think that's very interesting that things happen in the way they do. And it's almost somebody brought up to me after, not before, but after my daughter passed away, that things were set up. And they just, you know, it was a thing that I never saw. It never occurred to me until it was pointed out. And I didn't even understand it,
Mm,
at first when it was pointed out. But then, over a little bit of time, it became very, very clear that God had set out, you know, the series of events to set me up for what was going to be happening, if that makes any sense. And
absolutely.
I think that is truly amazing. So tell us a little bit more about what your journey looked like as far as working with these organizations, and helping advocate for organ donation. Um,
Yeah, it really took a life of its own, actually, when I started working with the organizations for organ donation. It started out with the newspaper articles and TV interviews and magazines, and people just kind of wanted to, I guess, get a hold of the story. And I spoke at Sick Kids Hospital. Yeah, there was many speaking engagements that took place. And at the time, because I was in my acute stages of grief, it kept me close to Rachel.
mhm,
And it kind of gave me purpose and a reason to have to get up and get dressed and go out. So it was kind of self-serving, but as time went on, I realized what a gift it was to others that I could actually share this story and have people, not only get the awareness of organ donation, but also to embrace their healing and to, realize for me that this was actually going to turn into my purpose, that I would end up working with people and helping them through their own grief process.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us who are in this service have stories, not the same, but stories where we have gone through something that has led us to want to help other people because of our own grief. And I remember when Isabella was alive, her nurses, several of them we discussed, the reason that they were nurses was because of losing someone that they loved very dearly. So it led them to want to be of service to other people. A lot of people who have gone through things like cancer, had a loved one in cancer, they work with that kind of thing and so on and so forth. So I find that very interesting as well. So did you have a lot of people personally reach out to you? Maybe they heard your story and they said, I'm going through something similar. Maybe it wasn't with a child, maybe it was with an adult, maybe they had come to this crossroads where they didn't know what their loved one wanted, and they just really personally needed somebody to relate to.
Yes, absolutely. That's actually how it started. When we were in the room praying over Rachel, and Sean was, up on the table and hugging her and saying goodbye to her and sending her to Jesus, they were all so taken by that and how we were handling that, that afterwards they would call me and say that they had somebody in the ward who was struggling, and they wondered if I would speak to them. So I said, sure. And so I would talk to them because, I was looking for people to relate to as well. So I would start talking to them, and I just found that because I had a strong faith, I actually could give them hope. So that actually kind of fueled me to start thinking that I actually might be able to help people once I got through my own healing journey.
So many people go through this thing where when they lose someone they love, that they get angry at God. If I were to assume that you didn't go through this process, would I be correct? That you,
No.
okay, no, okay. So how did that
No,
look for you?
yeah, I absolutely had anger, and anger was not something I really had a good relationship with. My anger scared me, and I just didn't want to go there, so I was pushing it down for all my might. But then it would start coming up in inopportune times and inappropriate ways, and so I knew that I was angry. And then it was like, okay, well, where do I place this anger? And I didn't want to be angry at my daughter. I mean, she was an 8-year-old girl. It's like, I can't get angry at her for leaving. And I wanted to get angry at the doctors, but it's like that seemed futile, because it's like, how am I going to get angry at the world-renowned hospital of sick kids? And so then I decided I was going to be angry at God. And so, because it seemed bigger than everything anyway, so it was like, it must be God. And so I was really angry at God, but then that was kind of limited too, because I needed him to lean on. So I was just kind of trying to teeter-totter through, having a place to express my anger, and just kind of knowing he could handle it, and knowing that he knew my heart and that he would know where I was coming from. I mean, he lost a son too. So just really like having to express that in some way. So I just journaled the anger towards God for quite some time.
Yeah, and we talk about that further in the symposium. So if you are looking to know more about that, make sure that you listen to Cheryl's interview for the 2020 Grief Symposium. So when you started helping people, and you started speaking out about the organ donation, this allowed you to kind of create a legacy for Rachel, and helped you have some hope, I'm guessing, and help other people have hope in certain ways. Can you speak a little bit to that piece of it, to, like, as you continue to go throughout the years, and it's a progression, it's a walking forward. Hopefully you're not staying in the same place. We all go through grief differently, but it's one step at a time, one moment at a time, one breath at a time kind of thing. How did that look for you?
Yeah, so when I was speaking at these engagements, I noticed that people wanted to talk to me afterwards. They would line up to talk to me, and I remember being so surprised because I was a perfect stranger, and they wanted to share their story with me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had these, like, really, to me, intimate, sacred conversations, I just thought, I don't think I will ever be able to go back to just fluff and superficial conversations with
Mm-hmm.
people, because I just saw how much people were hurting, and I knew I wasn't in a place to help anybody because I was trying to cope myself and trying to get myself through this situation. So, but it did really charge me to want to go forward and go through my own healing so that I could get into a place where I was able to help others. And so, yeah, that has progressed over the years. And I started working with clients, and I took courses on how to facilitate the groups and the workshops, and have, studied grief over the years. And, I didn't want it to really create my identity. Like, I didn't want to be a person who made a career out of grieving, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But but I knew that I was on kind of the other side of it. Not that grief ever stops, but I knew I was on the other side of the pain. And it just seemed like a waste if there weren't resources out there and I could teach people, and I could, show them the pitfalls and show them all the mistakes and lessons that I learned. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
And I found, working with people, that I had a gift for it. And people walked in one way and walked out the other. Like, I created an 8-week workshop, and I authored a book called My Good Grief: Healing from Loss. And I was praying one time, and I thought, how do I get all this out to people? Like, I loved
Mm-hmm.
working with people, but then that's about me, because I
Mm-hmm.
like working with people. And so I was meditating, and I was praying, like, how can I teach my lessons, and how can I get this, further out into the world? And what came to me was, if it wasn't about you wanting to sit and, work with people, what would you do? And I thought, well, I would write all the lessons down. I would write all the pitfalls. I would, just write everything down that I've learned, all my experiences, and I would make it available to people. So I spent the next year writing a book. And then I published it and got it up on Amazon. And I just thought, I want that to be a legacy. I want that to be a legacy of healing, so that it's available to people. Because so often in my own journey, and you tend to run into people who have dealt with loss, of course, and just seeing that they're still carrying around that pain, or them
Mm-hmm.
speaking the pain. And I know, by taking that healing journey, that I don't have to carry that pain anymore. And I'm just so grateful for doing that hard work that it takes to get on the other side of that pain. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been a journey, and one that has been painful. No two two ways
Mm-hmm.
about it. But I still am grateful that I did the work, and that I can have joy in my life now. And I know that that's available if people do take that journey.
It is. And, the Bible tells us that God wants us to enjoy this life, and
Mhm.
He has the goodness for us, or His goodness for us in the land of the living. That is one of my absolute favorite verses, and is the one that has really kept me going through my own experience with losing a child. And, you know, you know that people want to continue to heal, but like you said, sometimes they cannot see any way out of it. And with my own experience interacting with a lot of people in this whole grief uh, thing, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
you do see a lot of heartache, a lot of sadness out there, where people are 10 years past or into their own grave, and they just still don't see any joy. And it is extremely sad, being that we know that we still have to make a choice to live our life here and now, and that we are allowed to enjoy it. In fact, God wants us to enjoy our life. That doesn't mean that we are leaving behind our loved one, or we are disrespecting our loved one or forgetting them. However, it does mean that we have a space for them, but we also have a space to live our own lives. And I think that's extremely important, because you see so many people like you and myself, and so many people that I have met in this area, who are able now to reach out to others and help them because of their own experiences. And
Mhm.
I personally never knew that there were so many people out there that were talking about grief until I started doing this myself. Did you?
That's right. That's right. Because it was 20 years ago, 21 years ago that Rachel died. And at the time, I was looking all over the place. And at the time, it didn't seem like there was that many resources. But wow, have we ever come a long way. And now you Google it, and there's so many resources out there now.
Mhm.
So it's wonderful that there's actually a conversation about it. And why not? So many people deal with grief. So it should be a common conversation.
I believe so too. And it's this place where people feel like they're alone, and they don't have to be alone. And I think that's why most of us are where we are right now, trying to let other people say, hey, you know what, you can move forward from this, and you don't have to feel like you're alone. You don't have to feel like you're a burden. So, Cheryl, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners today about maybe anything about the organ donation in itself, specifically how to even think about that, how to plan for it? Maybe you didn't plan for it, and how to even start, because I'm assuming that it's very overwhelming for somebody, like you said yourself, you weren't expecting things to happen. And thankfully, you knew the course of action you had to take. But there are others who do not. So, can you lay out any kind of advice, and then also some encouragement for those people?
Yeah, I think it's a very individual choice, and I don't know that it's something that I have advice about other than sharing my own experience, in that it really gave me hope to know that my daughter had actually saved a couple of lives and gave two infants sight. So one
Mm.
of her corneas went to an infant who was blinded at birth, and another toddler who had been blinded in surgery, and gave them sight. And a little girl who needed a heart, she saved her life. And
Mm.
another young girl, they actually, we were in Toronto, Ontario, and they flew up from Pittsburgh to get Rachel's lungs, and they were transplanted into a 13-year-old girl who had already undergone a heart and a lung transplant. So this was her second lung transplant. So just knowing, like, that is just so bigger than us. And I can't even tell you where I'd be if that wasn't like the whole backdrop on my healing journey,
Mm.
and being able to embrace that, and like really, really
Mm.
honor Rachel for the little girl she was, and her big heart, and the generosity that goes along with that. And I wrote letters to all those people, and you can do it anonymously through the hospital. And I was so lucky, again, very divine intervention. My friend who lived in London saw a picture of a little girl who had undergone a heart transplant. And she was actually at an event with her daughter who was in Beavers. And there was a little girl there that had a mask on that was just visiting the Beaver group. And it turned out that one of the moms of the Beavers had brought this girl from the hospital. And this little girl went up to my friend and took her hand And my friend was just taken back, and she started to talk to my friend, and my friend couldn't believe how much this little girl looked like Rachel, and it had only
Mm.
been 2 months since Rachel died. And so my girlfriend asked this little girl when she got her heart, and it lined up with when Rachel died, and my girlfriend's knees just like kind of
Oh,
buckled.
wow.
And so she ended up seeing this newspaper article about this little girl and the heart transplant. And so I ended up calling that family. Now, it wasn't until 2 years later, because I wasn't ready, but
Hmm.
after 2 years, I reached out, and they were so excited, and they had been following Rachel's story because the dates lined up, and they suspected that Rachel had donated her organ to this other little girl, Mary. And we became friends with that family, and we are still so close to that family to this day. I mean, it's been 19 years now. We've been friends with them. It's a very special relationship. And I guess all I would say is you just don't know what is going to come out of your generosity. And
Hmm.
so they said it takes a lot of courage to do that. And,
Hmm.
it didn't feel like courage to me. It just felt like hopelessly that's the only thing I could do to fulfill her wishes. So
Hmm.
it felt like a surrender to me, not necessarily courage, but coming from the family who received Rachel's heart, it definitely came across as courage. And so if you can find the courage and find the generosity in your heart, you just don't know what's going to come of it. And it is bigger than us.
Yeah. Yeah, I was sitting there thinking it must have been bittersweet to do something like that because it is a part of your daughter. And all of us are certainly different, but personally, I was unable to even like think about things such as cremation or autopsy or anything like that because
Mm.
there's so much of a disconnect in your brain and logic and reality when you grieve somebody. And personally for me that was like hurting her, even though my brain knew that she was already gone, my heart couldn't uh, go there. So I would
Yeah,
assume
yeah.
that would be kind of a bittersweet thing where you're sad to part with that, and but also very excited to be able to fulfill her wishes, but also to be able to help all these other children. And then that was my other question, which you already answered about whether or not you are allowed to keep up with these individuals, and I think that that is just simply amazing because I know personally I would want to follow them. And I don't know, maybe it makes you feel like you have a connection still to Rachel, do you think? Or is that something that comes up at all?
Yeah, I mean, she's spoken of, and my son has a relationship with all those kids. There was 4 kids in the family, and actually, what ended up happening was Mary died after 4 years. So I knew her for only 2 of those years. And I remember when I was setting out to meet her, another girlfriend of mine said, "Oh my gosh, Cheryl, I don't know if this is a good idea. What if you meet her and she dies?"
Hmm.
And I thought, what if I don't meet her and she dies? I just thought, no,
Okay.
I just feel like my soul is here to have experiences of love,
Hmm.
and that was an experience of love. And now the oldest daughter just literally had her first baby, and she gave her the middle name of Mary for her
Oh.
little sister, and she named her Brooklyn, and that's the town where we met.
Okay.
And I had just seen her a few weeks before she had the baby, and she was saying that she wanted to somehow have Rachel and Mary, they're both their names, incorporated in the baby. And when we were reminiscing about meeting, and it was almost 20 years, Amanda said that she knew that it was the right name, that it's Brooklyn. So there's just such a special
Hmm.
bond. And you can't make that stuff up.
That's amazing. That is an
Yeah.
amazing story. Good things that come out of it. Um,
Yeah.
Well, this is such an interesting story for me. When I had asked about any advice, I guess being someone who has never dealt with the organ donation, is it something that the doctors take care of, or like it's a process in deciding who gets what? Is
Hmm.
that something that's really detailed and extensive, and that's kind of where I was kind of going with that. Maybe that's not a conversation for right now, but would you be able to touch on that just briefly?
Yeah, I can tell you that at Toronto Sick Kids, they were ever so gentle in the
Okay.
process. Like I felt very held through the whole process. And I'm still in touch with Lisa McCarthy, who was the nurse at Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. I mean, just through Facebook and social media.
Mhm.
But she was just the most kind, gentle soul and held me through the whole process. Now, as far as in the background, who gets the organs and what organs, they manage all of that. And I mean, to me it was like Rachel's wishes, so they could have any part of her that would help somebody. So they assess, because of the infection, what organs they can harvest, and they take care of where that would go. So yeah, that's all out of your hands. It's mostly just holding you through the process of saying yes,
Okay.
and giving your permission. That's really your only part.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And before we go, I would like for you to tell everybody where they can find you if they want to reach out to you, maybe have a conversation.
Sure. You can reach out to me at www.mygoodgrief.com. And I'm also on Facebook. So My Good Grief, there's a public Facebook page as well as a private group, and they're both called My Good Grief.
Okay, awesome, Cheryl. Thank you so much for being here with me on Faith Breathes Hope. And for those of you who are listening, I hope you continue to be blessed and bless others. We'll see you next week. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.